Thank you so much, Ramakant. That was wonderful because I think you have actually touched upon a very wide range of issues, but you have avoided the dryness and technical rigidity of these issues. Made it very simple. I learned a lot, and in fact, I couldn't agree with you more on a number of things that you said, and particularly when it comes to matters like corporate litigation. We've been taking a look at how corporate litigation runs and the cost of the time that it takes in settling corporate disputes, and we found that the best state or the best city in India is actually Hyderabad. And Hyderabad takes 740 days to settle an average corporate dispute, whereas in Singapore it takes 120 days. So I think the difference is phenomenal. Even within India, when we talk about certain parts of India being better than others, the difference is absolutely phenomenal. But maybe we will just leave that for later discussions. For the time being, I'm sure there will be questions, comments on what you have presented. Would you prefer taking questions in a group, or would you like to just answer them as they come? Okay. Prof.
Thank you very much. For a politics man, you have been very enlightening. I particularly liked the sort of first part where you show where politics and law meet. If you're an Indian politics man, you remember that everything started with the East India Company, and it was not for India's welfare. So, companies are there for profit making, and politics, at least in India, as Indian politicians will tell you, is there for public welfare. So, one starts with the contradiction. And under Jawaharlal Nehru, that whole early period, we have seen the tussle between very narrow legalistic definition of compensation and property and the majority requirement in the parliament to have almost a confiscatory compensation law. So that contradiction has been there for a long time. What interests me very much is the possibility that the two might converge, so that one might want to say, what is good for business is good for India. No, something like, let's say, what one would like to believe in Singapore. When you talk about compromise, is this compromise that you find going to the estimates committee and committee, is there this contradictory pole between profit making and promoting public welfare? I want to come back to your last example. Why is it easy to incorporate a company but so hard to close it? Is that because, if you can't simplify setting up, you can't also simplify resolution and creation of more companies. So, is that where the crux of the matter lies? Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Would you like to respond? Yeah, sure.
Thank you, Professor, for both your questions, which are very valid. I think on the first question, it's a very valid question on whether companies are for profit making or public welfare. And this whole discussion in the lead up to the Companies Act has been riddled with this question that we've been thinking about. So maybe if I were to look at it a little bit historically, and this has been part of another piece of work that I'm concurrently doing, where if you look at history, historically, if you look at from East India Company or even the old Indian company legislation, which is borrowed from the English, it was all about companies are for profit making. But it's only in the post-independence era where not just the company law became fairly socialist, but even the Supreme Court started becoming socialist, where they started saying that the companies should act for public good. So, for example, if you look at the 1960s or maybe 1970s, judges like Justice Krishna and Justice Bhagwati have actually stated so that companies are not just for profit making. So they are the ones who kind of gave the lead to companies being for public good. Then what you have is post-1991. Post-1991, we kind of forgot some of that. And for about 20 years, we said, okay, let's have foreign investment, let's not have to talk about, the MREP Act, for example, was shelved. So a lot of things which were kind of for public welfare were somewhere forgotten along the way. But in this debate that we're currently talking about, the public good aspect has come back and very strongly. Because what you have today, and I'll just describe one or two things. So today, there is an express mandate in the Companies Act that the directors of a company have to act not just in the interest of the shareholders, but in the interest of consumers, employees, the environment, and the community. It's expressly stated in the Companies Act. So that's a very strong message. And to that extent, India is fairly different, in my opinion, compared to many other countries, because now today directors can't just think about shareholders, they have to think about other constituencies as well. And the second, of course, there's a much debated aspect of corporate social responsibility, which has now come very strongly in the Indian Companies Act. So I think today, in the 2013 Act, I think we're moving more towards the public good standpoint and not just shareholder. And very quickly on your second point on incorporation to dissolution, I think the dissolution tends to be a lot more complicated, and typically it's not because of the corporate law system. So one of the challenges in dissolving a company is you have to ensure that the company has paid all its taxes. So now there's no coordination which will ensure that within a stipulated period of time, the income tax department should give a clearance saying that it's fine, all the dues have been paid, because that would take long. And similarly, there could be many other government departments, etc. So I think unless we have a coordinated, streamlined process where all the authorities come and say, fine, this is now done, the company has discharged all its dues, let's put it to rest. Until that happens, it's going to be a continuously long process. So it's probably a more complex situation.
Chen?
Perhaps speak a little bit more about retrospective taxes, how that affects the investment environment, and why this government chose to also pursue it when they were in opposition, they really tried out.
So I suppose, thanks for the question. I'll definitely address that question, although it's kind of somewhat linked. Yeah, it's a little away, but it goes to the same sentiment of what the government is trying to do. Of course, to a large extent, it's a retrospective taxation that kind of saw investments and growth in India falling since the early 2012 when the announcements came. So I think that's a big issue to a large extent, and you're absolutely right that the new government had, kind of questioned that, and it was anticipated that nothing similar would happen, but now we are in a similar situation with this whole MAT for foreign portfolio investors kind of an issue. And to me, I think the government seems to have been, I'm not so sure if this time around it's as severe as it was the last time, because the finance minister made a statement that the tax is going to be, the certain clarifications are going to be prospective. So the idea is what happens in the past is a little open-ended, right? So it's not a retrospective taxation, but it seems like the tax department can reopen the transactions. But this time I think the government has been pretty quick in saying that we're not going to let that happen. All those notices have now been held in abeyance, and this issue has been referred to the Law Commission for discussion under Justice A.P. Shah. So you're right that in a sense there has been a repetition of a concern that was there in the past, but I think this time they've probably been a lot quicker in addressing the issue. Although the truth is the foreign portfolio investments have kind of dropped in the last few weeks since this issue came about.
Thanks, Roger.
I have a question about the political process and connecting the discussion we had. You mentioned the discussion we referred to the Standing Committee on Finance in 2009, and you were saying that sort of the Irani recommendations with IBM, particularly the committee system, somewhere is supposed to sort of hear out and take on board suggestions by various interested parties. And so the question is, does so
reasonably well. So if you could sort of provide some insight into the committee process and how particularly it functions. And a quick second question is, what of the legislation that are now being amended by the new government, including the land acquisition? The BJP was actually part into the earlier legislation. There seems to be a contradiction where they actually voted for whatever the act was, and now they're trying to undo some of the rules. So you could sort of shed some light again.
Thanks, Ram. I think you're absolutely right. The committee process does not mean that the committee was basically dictating the terms. So, just my knowledge of this is by going through the committee report, and it's quite evident in the committee reports that they've taken into account various different. So, the basic actors that were involved are the committee members and the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, which was to a large extent in the background getting industry feedback. So, it is perhaps right to say that they have taken into account all of these feedbacks, but if you look at the committee report itself, the main player seems to be the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, and to a large extent the committee was going through what the MCA has to say on this, and MCA at the back end was kind of consulting with the industry. So it's a pretty complicated process that they have arrived at, where I agree that it would be unfair to say that it was thrust upon the industry. The industry was consulted, but their participation may have been fairly in the background as opposed to something where, like in the Irani committee, they may have been at the forefront of the process itself. And just to answer your second question, I think I would agree that Companies Act is a good example of where the BJP was at the forefront of bringing some of these changes in terms of through the committee, which was headed by a then BJP person. But today, some of that is now getting reversed. So I suppose that's a part of the process and what stance you have to take at what point of time.
Surya.
So Modi has been studying about Commonwealth states, inviting foreign investments in way, and also promising ease of doing business in India. And in ever so many countries, it's been saying that you would have a special mechanism, say, for investments from Japan, for investments from several other countries. What does it really mean in practice? Would he have to have a separate corporate law for foreign investments, or would he have to have, say, separate law for foreign state enterprises and a separate law for foreign private enterprises?
I suppose the underlying legal system, whether it be the corporate law, whether it be foreign investment or any other legislation, I don't think there is a sense that there's going to be different legislation either for foreign investors or for foreign investors from specific countries. But I think the extent to which this kind of statements that are being made may have an impact is, for example, if you take Japan, there is this agency, I think it's called the JETRO. So maybe they will, for Japanese investors, perhaps they will take a more proactive role in spearheading some of the approval process. They may help out and so on. So to me, it seems like legally the regime will be uniform or homogeneous for everyone. But the facilitation process may be initiated differently through these Chamber of Commerce or intergovernmental kind of organizations, which may play a different role. And that's pretty much how it has been in the past, but I think that may change now and become more the case in the future.
Gurdeep Singh from PTI. There seems to be the corporate affairs minister is taking its own move forward with section 396 and 397 on FTIL and NSE, despite a court case and all that. A complaint, of course, from the not so fair FTIL is that they be pressured into this. So what are you reading there? You know, what is the minister trying to prove? I mean, despite the court case there, at the same time having a new company acts amendment.
So, unfortunately, I probably won't comment on the specific case because it's been a very controversial case, as you might have seen as well in the Indian context. So, I suppose the kind of the broader issue there would be twofold. The first is the sections 396 and 397 of the 1956 Act are sections which still operate because the new act has not yet come into force. And the reason why the new act has not yet come into force is because this National Company Law Tribunal is still in litigation before the Supreme Court, so the government is going to notify the new act sections only thereafter. Now coming to the second question, which is kind of broader, I think there's a lot of controversy around whether this merger or the so-called forced marriage that the government is trying to initiate is a good thing or a bad thing. I think many investors, so to me it seems like it's a transfer of value from one set of people to another set of people. Because if you force a company to merge, the company which is getting merged, the creditors of that company may actually benefit because you're getting into a company which has better resource base, and so in this particular case, the investors who were kind of so-called defrauded might end up being better off through this merger. But the counter is also true, which is the existing minority shareholders of the company which is better off, they are getting a raw deal because of this forced merger by the government, so they may have a claim to make as well. So to a large extent, I think it's a position that the government has taken, and I know that it's a controversial position, and these kind of situations have happened in the past as well, where the central government has the power to force a merger of two companies, and usually they will do it in a situation like this, where there is a bit of a problem. So I agree it's a bit of a controversial position, but legally I think it's something that the government is entitled to do, and that's what they have done in this particular case.
But that case is pending with the courts.
That is I agree. So that is a legal dispute which is pending. So again, I'm not fully familiar with the detailed facts of the case, but that is a power which can be exercised, and if there is a issue that can also be then challenged before the courts and so on. So I see that you raise a legal issue, and I know that this issue has been raised as well by some of the parties involved, and unless it's litigated, we will never know.
Aisha, I'll come to you, but just before that, I couldn't making this comment. I have this little comparative list before me between the Singapore Companies Act and the Indian Companies Act. And the Singapore Companies Act actually does not allow cross-border mergers. A Singapore company is not allowed to merge with an overseas company. The Indian Companies Act allows this. So no wonder this example that Umakant gave of Maruti. Well, that's a question of a subsidiary. But today, if there is a contemplating merger that is being planned, then this whole question of shifting values, though here it's mentioned that it has to be done with the approval of the Reserve Bank of India, but nonetheless this merger is allowed. So, in fact, this to me is a very striking difference between the two regulations, and obviously there is a question of philosophy involved here in terms of approaching the two regulations, the difference in this position. Aisha?
My question to you is, when Sri Lanka introduced this Companies Act, new Companies Act in 2017, they adopted the article. So I would like to know whether the case is similar in the 2000.
So thanks. Unfortunately, it's not, because India still very religiously sticks to the principle of ultra-virus, and that is one of the things that Singapore has done away with, and it probably adds to doing of business. So India has to have Indian companies have to have detailed options laws to carry out all the businesses, because if you start a business which is not in it, you would be subject to this principle of ultra-virus. So to that extent, perhaps Sri Lanka has addressed this before India was able to, or India still hasn't addressed it.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I have two questions. One is, you began by saying that the reforms are very driven by the desire to ease doing business because of this given by the World Bank. While I can imagine that a lot of those are not related to reforms in company law because of the macroeconomic indicators or things like that also. So it's beyond, everything is beyond just the company law. But in terms of the company law, as you also said, that right now it's very limited, what are the type of, say, what we commonly say low-lying fruits that the government would affect or further reform in the laws, apart from the ones that you have mentioned, which really could impact this ease of doing business? I mean, maybe as researchers what would be, or political scientists what would be looking out for it on that front. My second question relates to the reform made last year, particularly related to the requirement for putting aside some amount for the CSR. So how does that compare with other company laws elsewhere, or like how does this requirement for CSR and from a foreign investor point of view, is this seen as an impediment? It increases the burden of doing business? Because of the conversation we had, that's one of the areas where the public good and the business is one way merging quite directly in the CSR area.
Thanks. So I think on your first question about low-hanging fruit, there are many, for example, this ultra-virus thing that we talked about, the objects clause, as I mentioned, that would be low-hanging fruit. There are things like authorized capital, paid-up capital, the par value of shares. So these are, many countries have done away with it, saying that it doesn't really help us much. So these things I don't think is going to help, it's going to affect anyone adversely if you just knock them out. It will make it easy for doing business. And there are many more. So for example, can a company buy back its own shares? Can a company reduce capital? So there are many details where India has taken a very, very rigid stance. Singapore has kind of gone a little further to say there are restrictions, but they've made it a little easy. Some countries, like for example Delaware in the US, has pretty much said you can do what you want. So long, there will be certain rules, but there's a lot more flexibility. So there are a few things that can be listed out as to what the low-lying fruits are, where I think you can do it pretty much without minority investors saying our interests are being affected or creditors saying so. The second one on CSR, I think as Amitabh said, Singapore doesn't have it. Many countries have the concept of CSR, but to me, I think India is one of the only few countries, if at all any other countries there, where CSR has been included in the company legislation. Where otherwise it's a way of doing business, it's really socially responsible. But here, it's provided for in the Companies Act. And this perhaps also goes back to the question that Ranajai asked. The CSR is a good example where the first recommendation of the standing committee was to say it is mandatory. Every company of a certain size has to spend 2% of its profits for CSR. Now the industry came back and said no, so don't make it mandatory, make it what they call comply or explain. So today, that part of the recommendation was watered down. So today what you have in the Companies Act is a so-called comply or explain. So today if you don't spend 2%, you're not going to go to, there's no enforcement action against the company, but the company has to be able to explain why it is not spending the 2%. So even that, I think in a legislation, India is probably unique. I have not seen it in any other. I have only read about Saudi Arabia having something like this, but no other company in either the Western or emerging world has something as stringent, even though today what we have is only a comply or explain and not mandatory.
Yes,
You know, like very because we asked Sachin Karan for a year ago about how people use this CSR. We say they are not used for staff training as well. So a lot of this CSR is used for staff training.
In fact, I want to back that question up by saying that what comprises CSR? I mean, what is CSR basically? What kind of action? If let us say underprivileged children from an orphanage are taken for a lunch, is that CSR? Medical insurance, is that CSR? I think these are questions that have come up.
So I think there's of course a whole list of things which amount to CSR, which is there as a schedule to the Companies Act itself, which has since undergone a change. So I think something like what Amitabh mentioned about welfare program for children would certainly be part of CSR. But strangely enough, two things which you would normally think is social responsibility are not considered CSR. One is employee welfare. When if you set up an employee welfare, maybe employee training, I'm not so sure, but if you set up an employee welfare scheme, that's not considered CSR, because it seems like CSR has to be something to the community and not just to your own venture or your own employees only. And secondly, whatever is regularly carried on as part of your business is not CSR, right? Because normally it has to be something extra. So which is why to me it seems like this is not CSR, this is corporate philanthropy, and there's a difference. Because CSR is you have to be socially responsible in anything you do, whereas what you have in the Companies Act today is really corporate philanthropy or corporate charity, where you want companies to spend on social welfare.
So just to push on that, say now the idea of CSR now globally is very much on say ensuring sustainability, say the supply chain mechanism, ensuring non-corrupt practices are part of that process. So in this current CSR, so that's not, those are not counted, right?
So there are two parts to the CSR. One part is every company has to have a CSR committee, but every company that qualifies for this has to have a committee for CSR which will implement policies. So I would imagine that something like part of your supply chain, where you're sourcing of materials from, who's doing that, are they subject to human rights abuses, all that would be part of your CSR. But what are you doing with this 2% of the profits for the last 3 years? That is very, very specific to what it is. So on the one part, there is CSR in terms of what you're doing, but when it comes to the 2%, they only want to do it outside of the company and not something within the company.
Let us forget India for a moment, and let's think radically. Let us think of John Locke. In the Lockean world, what is good for the individual is also good for the community, because property, as you know, nature is free, man puts a boundary around a piece of nature and transforms it so that property becomes an extension of itself, which is where the sacred right to property comes from. Now if you think of the company as an artificial person, then its welfare should also be, in the Lockean world, thought of as sacrosanct. And in an ideal liberal world, what would be good for the individual then is good for business, good for, therefore, the community, which is the sum of all individuals. Now, if you take that as the standard measure, I would argue, why do we have to smuggle in ideas like corporate social responsibility? Because somewhere someone is thinking that profit-making profits some people, not other people. Now, why can't those other people also set up their own companies? Why do they wait for a handout from the lucky ones or the talented ones? If I push this argument even further, I would say the job of a company is to make profit and use that profit to produce more profit by investing in cutting-edge research, which makes it world-class. So, in a radically Lockean world, I would say there should be no need for corporate social responsibility. The second argument would be, might there be a little bit of a bureaucratic power which hides behind concepts like corporate social responsibility or some form of socialism, or the need to clip the wings of talented individuals trying to make super profits?
So I think to take your first question, as you started off by saying it's not with reference to India but more generically, I think the reason why, so there are two philosophies on CSR. I think one way of looking at it is it's a very controversial area. We can't even define what CSR is. So let's not try to make it part of law. Right? About like before the Companies Act came in 2013, many people, probably to some extent, including myself, were thinking of it from that point of view. Because if you can't fully appreciate the concept, how can you make it part of the law? And today, as you rightly said, there are many people who argue that, for example, Milton Friedman has said the only social responsibility of a company is to make profits. And that would necessarily take into account. So, which is why I think many countries have resisted from treating this as part of law, but as part of something which you anyway have to do, because it's very difficult to define what it is. And maybe, so this is what some countries, for example in the UK, calls it as enhanced shareholder value. Right? Which is if you work for the benefit of your shareholders, you are also enhancing the other communities as well. And if there's a conflict between the two, then shareholder constituency is the most important. So which is why they have not. So there's a pretty big divergence between what UK has done. It's on the lines of the Lockean world that you mentioned, whereas India has decided to go the other way around completely. And that kind of links up with your second question, which I think is my sense of what actually happened. And to me, it seems like this is a reaction somewhere after all the scandals in India. It's like, let's clip the wings. You know, the corporate sector has already caused, this is my it's probably an uneducated guess on this, is some kind of a unverified thesis, is to say that this was a reaction that to the corporate scandals, which gave a sense that we need to do something about it. We need to be seen to do something. So let's clip the wings of corporates. Let's make them more of a. So this going back to the 1960s, 70s socialism. Because now at that time it was more judge-oriented and some legislation, but this time it was like clearly the parliamentary process has taken the baton and said, let's have all these obligations, because we don't want companies only to make profits. They should have a larger social role to play.
Please, CSR can use fun chairs.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
How this is slightly different from the topic. So we have now laws like the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act in the US and the UK Bribery Act. So these are supposed to change the behavior of foreign companies in cities like India. So do you think that this has changed their practices and say from the governance side, administrative side of crimes and corruption, things are steady. So how is this changed for the foreign companies operating in India?
So I think that's a valid question. And so the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act of the US and Bribery Act of the UK, though they are not Indian legislation, they have an impact on a lot of operations of businesses in India in two ways. One is a lot of the multinational companies are bound by these obligations, where no matter where in the world they carry out their businesses. So they have to be, even if they carry out business in India, they are bound by that. And secondly, you have a lot of Indian companies and Indian groups carrying on businesses in places like UK and US. So for example, an Infosys will de facto be subject to the FCPA, though it's not based, because it has operations in the US. So to that extent, in the last 5-6 years, at least if not longer, a lot of these have somehow been inculcated into the Indian ecosystem. So when a board of directors are thinking about bribery, they can't simply say that Prevention of Corruption Act doesn't say anything about corporations, so we don't have to worry. That's not the way it is. They are still quite impacted, though it is foreign legislation. And I think that's going to be increasing from a governance point of view going forward.
Madan, unfortunately, I have to draw this to a close, though I think we could have continued longer. I had a couple of questions which we will discuss at an appropriate stage. Thank you so much. We have made you work. We grilled you a lot. In fact, in the beginning today, I had the apprehension whether we will be able to bat out the full 50 overs. We have done so to the last ball. We really grilled you, and that's just because you made us think. So thank you so much. I think it's been a fantastic session. One of those rare sessions, I think, where we really got the opportunity to engage as extensively as we wanted to. So please come back and talk to us again. We look forward to a longer association. And you have seen from the interests expressed by people that what you said has kind of generated a very wide variety of responses. So I think all of us, in our own individual interest-specific domain, would like to keep this conversation going. And as a token of our appreciation, a couple of books for us.